Welcome back. Do you remember when we used to have ordinary weeks when there would be big momentous stories that broke on Monday and we would still be talking about it by the end of the week? Once upon a time, when the president nominated the Supreme Court justice who could tip the balance of the court, it would be huge news for days, even weeks. But President Trump's pick of federal judge Brett Kavanaugh is so Monday. In the interim, he wreaked havoc at the NATO summit, even threatening to leave the alliance that has protected the free world for 70 years, then goes on to diss the UK's prime minister as he heads over to a state dinner she is throwing in his honor. And of course, all of this before jetting off to meet Putin, even as his own Justice Department indicts 12 Russian intelligence officers for interfering with our presidential election to his benefit. Joining us for more is State Representative Julio Gonzalez, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Wendy March, political correspondent for the Tampa Bay Times. So we'll start.
What a week.
Jeez.
What a day.
Let's start with the latest news that broke several hours ago, the indictments of 12 Russian intelligence officers for hacking into the Democratic National Committee, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and to Hillary Clinton's campaign. The president, Rod Rosenstein, says was informed about these indictments before he left for Europe. But still this morning he said this.
I call it the rigged witch hunt. I think that really hurts our country, and it really hurts our relationship with Russia.
Julio, how could he say it's rigged when he knows that these are Russian government officials being indicted for interfering with our election?
I think the rigging that he's talking about goes back to all the going-ons that were taking place during the Hillary years, and the attempts that were being made to steer the election in one way or another. I think he's convinced that there's been Russian meddling, that the Russian meddling was to a great extent allowed or facilitated by the Obama administration, by their tacit positions on investigating and preventing the gross bias that was identified. And so, yeah, I think he's got a very good reason to be very upset about what had happened in the prior administration.
Rita?
What I really care about is the fact, what are we going to be doing for the next set of elections? We just had big hearings yesterday. I'm sure you all were watching the hearings, and we're not seeing anything legislatively being done to protect the next set of elections. So I think there's a lot of really big, important issues here.
Wendy, when it comes to that, the Florida Secretary of State's office confirms today that Russians tried to hack into our election system here in Florida, that they were not successful. But a lot of folks in Congress are saying that they're expecting the Russians to mingle or meddle into the midterm elections, maybe even to a degree more than they did in 2016.
Yes, and Democrats, of course, are criticizing what they call a complete lack of urgency on the part of the Republican federal administration, the national administration, and at the state level. What they say is a complete lack of urgency in trying to deal with this. And they're saying that's for political reasons, that Republicans don't want to call attention to what the Russians have been trying to do in our elections.
And I think that's the part I'm most offended about, is that that's what our government officials are there to do, to protect us and to protect democracy. And I really do want to see us, really come to protect us.
We are just scratching the surface. Our conversation on The Week in Washington continues. Welcome back. We are talking about The Week in Washington, and joining us for more are State Representative Julio Gonzalez, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Wendy March, the political correspondent for the Tampa Bay Times. Okay, you all help me figure this one out. The president goes over to a state dinner with Theresa May, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and as they're eating dinner, news breaks about an interview that the president gave with a newspaper. There's audio of it in which he says that Theresa May is totally wrong about how she's handling Brexit, that he gave her suggestions and ideas, and then he holds a news conference later on with Theresa May and says this.
She's a total professional, because when I saw her this morning, I said, I want to apologize because I said such good things about you. She said, don't worry, it's only the press. I thought that was very professional.
So he's apologizing that the newspaper didn't include all the nice things he said about her. He's denying the comments, that the criticisms of her, even though, Julio, it was recorded and broadcast.
President is fantastic in just throwing the bowling ball and making the pins fly. He keeps people off their feet. And I think that's part of the reason why he's been successful in essentially redefining international relations and relations in NATO.
And I would argue that those are the reasons many of us feel he's destabilized the world.
But on the other hand, there's a bunch of people who feel that he's finally saying what they wish they could say to a foreign dignitary.
What is the logic if Theresa May, the Prime Minister, is one of his closest allies? The comments that he made undercuts her position at a very difficult time for her.
Was one of his closest allies. If you noticed, the press conference was very, very tense. There was definitely a lot of tension and all of that. The only winner in all of this is Vladimir Putin. Let's face it. What is Donald Trump weighing in on Brexit for anyhow when he's on their soil? What in the world is it any of our business of him trying to destabilize what they're trying to do and the people of Britain are trying to do?
Julio, let me give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, I will agree in that, the relationships have been inconsistent. And I think that is precisely why Trump is the perfect person to go and represent the United States. I think in the end, what you're going to see is that from all the ruckus, you're going to see a new redefinition of what NATO is and how they participate, particularly Europe. And I think he's going to do many of the same techniques against Putin when he meets with him next week.
I want to talk more about NATO in a moment, but Wendy, you saw the streets of London filled with protesters today, and this incredible video, I think we have it, of the Trump baby balloon, which was not exactly complimentary to the president. There we see.
And it was 100,000.
Yeah, that's quite a sight. I don't know what's more impressive, the crowd or the balloon. But Wendy, what are people here, in the Tampa Bay area to make of this? Do they really care that all these people are going out on the streets of London, and that the president, evidently feels he couldn't do these visits in London because there was so much public opinion against him?
Well, it's not going to be a front burner issue for most American voters. Let's face it, how the crowds of thousands in the streets of London feel about Donald Trump. But I think it generates a certain feeling of unease when this is happening with one of our major allies. Now, I've heard lots of interviews today with some of those protesters in London. A lot of them were saying, oh, this is just a phase, we'll get over it. We're still the United States' ally. Trump says this today, he'll say something else tomorrow. But I still think it generates something of a feeling of unease. To me, it's completely inexplicable that Trump would do this on the eve of, or just hours before, a meeting with Theresa May, and as you pointed out, on their soil.
Meeting with Putin on Monday, and then, but taking NATO to the woodshed before he goes there. There's an issue in terms of how much money all these countries are contributing to it. But there is an agreement that that was made several years ago to that end. The president, Julio, left the NATO summit saying that these countries agreed to increase their funding, when factually that's not true.
The conversation needed to be had. The relationship between the NATO nations and the role that the United States is playing was a necessary conversation. It needs to be disruptive. It needs to be tough. It needs to be done from the standpoint not of a politician, which Trump traditionally has not been, but from a negotiator in chief that sometimes recognizes that you have to take the tough line, toe the tough line when you're in the position of strength.
Yeah, real quick.
I would completely are saying it's corrosive and disruptive, and it's not helping us with our international place in the world.
Okay, we are just getting warmed up. Our conversation on the week in Washington will continue after a quick break. Welcome back. We are talking about the week in Washington, and joining us for more are State Representative Julio Gonzalez, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Wendy March, political correspondent for the Tampa Bay Times. And Wendy, let's start with a subject that you and I talked about earlier today. It's fascinating, the Republicans running for office during this cycle, from Rick Scott to Julio Gonzalez, in terms of how they deal with President Trump and talk about him on the campaign trail, really depends upon what seat they're running for. And you really have a remarkable observation about starting with the governor.
Well, the governor, there is no closer political ally for Donald Trump, and yet he purposely and repeatedly and consistently does not mention Trump at all in his stump speech. He was asked this week if he thinks the president's doing a good job. He declined to give a direct answer. All he did was talk about oil drilling and the dike around Lake Okeechobee. So you have a man who is a close Trump ally, but who's keeping him at a distance politically as
Why?
he's on. That's a really good question, and the best I could come up with is a speculative guess of an answer. I suspect that Rick Scott sees things happening, like 12 Russians being indicted for election meddling. He thinks it's possible that Mueller could come up with something, that the Mueller investigation could pop, and he doesn't want to be standing too close when the bomb goes off.
Julio, you are running for a seat in a very red district. There are other congressional districts nearby. Same case where the candidates, Republican candidates, can't be running any quicker to be on the coattails of President Trump. But on the other hand, I never hear Vern Buchanan talking about Donald Trump. If anything, he's running commercials talking about how independent he is. This is a conundrum for Republicans, is it not?
What is a conundrum?
About whether or not you run talking about the president or not.
No, for me personally, it's not. And I can't tell you the analysis of other districts and how they shape the conversation, but I can tell you that the overwhelming opinion in my district and with the people that I meet, and sometimes verging into Vern's district, is the fact that they are really happy that he's in office, and they're really happy about the policies that he's enacting.
So you would not run a commercial as Vern is doing right now, talking about how independent you are?
I always run a commercial that talking about how independent because I am, because I pride myself on my ability to independently think. But in my independent reasoning and analysis, I come to the same conclusions that our president is in terms of the policies that he's promoting and the agenda he's trying to accomplish.
Rita, the same goes for the Democrats. They have to make a decision about whether they are running against President Trump or trying to run their own campaign. Even in the 16th Congressional District, David Shapiro, and we got to say, the Cook Report, a national organization that looks at these races, are now calling the 16th Congressional District only leaning Republican.
Which is pretty amazing.
Right, but David Shapiro is not lighting up the fires going after Trump or trying to tie Vern Buchanan to Donald Trump.
Well, I think Gabby Gifford was here the other week, and the entire focus of her trip here was to highlight gun regulation and the need for gun safety, and I think that was a complete strike against Vern Buchanan.
Right, but not against Vern Buchanan's relationship with Donald Trump, or the incredible amount of times that Vern Buchanan votes the way that the president wants him to.
David Shapiro has been pretty clear in everything that Vern Buchanan has voted 98% of the time with Donald Trump, and I think you're going to continue to see that in this race.
What about other congressional districts nearby?
Well, you have a different sort of a picture. For example, in Congressional District 15, the Dennis Ross seat, which runs basically from Temple Terrace over to Lakeland and goes up a little bit into Lake County, it's a more rural district, and there you have Republicans, 5 Republicans running in a primary to replace Dennis Ross, and they are all hardline Trumpists. The one, Neil Comby, for example, during the 2016 primary, he was a never-Trumper, but he now says he's running to be Donald Trump's reinforcements in Washington.
So, Julio, but there are other congressional districts, like in South Florida, Ileana Ross-Layton's district, Brian Mast in West Palm Beach, which are now so close that those members of Congress or those Republicans down there are not mentioning Trump at all.
Well, like I said, and I mentioned it before, when you run to represent the people in your district. And you have to instill the confidence of the people in your district that you're going to reflect what they want you to accomplish. In some districts, that means that that you assert certain positions and certain principles stronger than in others. I'm very happy because in my district, it's a district where I'm very comfortable asserting my opinions because they jive so well with the people in my district. But I could see how in another district, somebody might want to take a more softer position.
Rita, quickly, on Friday nights, my favorite show next to this one is Bill Maher, who often asks, why aren't Democrats taking it to Trump? They seem to be trying to find whatever way to win this election, but not necessarily going after him a mano a mano.
I think the whole thing is going to be, this upcoming election is going to be completely a referendum on Donald Trump. And I think, I told you last time I was on the show, Democrats are being counseled to do exactly what Julio said, which is understand your constituencies and speak to them. And that's how they've won the special elections.
Okay, we want to thank our guests for being here tonight. State Representative Julio Gonzalez, Rita Ferrandino, the former chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Wendy March, political correspondent for the Tampa Bay Times.